Larry Strickling is Assistant Secretary of Commerce. He is responsible, he's the head of NTIA, Assistant Secretary for Communication and Information at Commerce. Larry is well known throughout the industry for many years as leadership both in the private and public sector. He was Chief Regulatory and Chief Compliance Officer at Broadwind Communications, served at Allegiance Telecom, Core Express, Board of Directors, Network Plus. In government, Larry had earlier served at the FCC as Chief of the Common Carrier Bureau from '98 to 2000. He also served as Associate General Counsel and Chief of FCC's Competitive Division. And I really got to know him fairly well, I think, at one point when he was Vice President of Meritech and had earlier been a partner at Kirkland & Ellis. So from private sector, law firm, various places in government, we have somebody with a breadth and depth of experience and understanding of a lot of key issues. And I think you may have noticed him being in the news recently a little bit, being related to ICANN. And as I mentioned earlier, we have FADEC coming, following, and so this is an issue we know is important. A lot of people seem to think it's important and don't understand it, but we have someone here who can explain it and who knows how important it is. Thank you very much for being with us, Larry.
Well, thank you, Ed, and I want to thank CCIE for inviting me to speak here today. And before she leaves, I absolutely want to thank Congresswoman Eshoo. She's a rock star. I will tell you, the internet has no stronger supporter up on Capitol Hill than her, and thankfully NTIA has no stronger supporter than the Congresswoman, and we thank you for all of your help and support over the last few years. And as Ed and the Congresswoman have mentioned, we're going to continue to need some of that support here over the next few weeks or months. I'm really happy to be here with CCIA because from your beginning, you've been a tireless advocate for the tech community in Washington, and I want to congratulate you for your more than 4 decades of service promoting policies for open markets, open networks, and full, fair, and open competition. And I want to thank Ed personally for his, I think now nearly 20 years of service at the head of this organization. Now, preparing for this speech, I did take a look at CCIA's website. And I was not the least bit surprised to see that your core principles focus on innovation. As your mission statement makes clear, understanding and protecting innovation is central to our industry's future. And as you point out, it's not an accident that innovation has flourished in a society that values an open, competitive economic marketplace, nor where original, independent, and free speech are enshrined in law. I could not agree with those sentiments more, and at NTIA, we understand the important role the open internet has had in driving innovation, economic growth, and societal change around the world, and we're working hard to keep it that way. At NTIA and the Department of Commerce, our work on internet policy is guided by 3 simple principles. First, we support the internet as a platform for economic growth. In doing so, we focus both on increasing the number of internet users as well as encouraging more intensive use by existing users. Second, we support the internet as a platform for innovation, and in doing so, we seek to develop policies that are flexible, creative, and rapidly adaptable to fast-changing technology. And third, we view the internet as our client, not any one set of stakeholders. In setting policy, we must balance the competing interests of users by focusing on what policies best support economic growth and innovation. So how do we put these principles in practice? The 2 key concepts we apply in support of growth are maintaining and increasing trust of users of the internet and expanding the global reach of the internet economy. And to support innovation, we want to make sure policymaking is flexible and adaptable. And that is why we are such strong supporters of the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. Now, all of these values came to a head in our March 14th announcement of our intent to transition certain internet domain name functions to the global multi-stakeholder community. We took this step to preserve and protect the growing and innovative internet, an internet led by a community of companies, technical experts, civil society, and governments. Now, to give everyone a quick review of that announcement, for 16 years, it has been the clear and unquestioned policy of the United States government that the private sector should lead the management of the domain name system. In its 1998 policy statement, the Department of Commerce stated that the U.S. government is committed to a transition that will allow the private sector to take leadership for domain name management. Since then, the department, through NTIA, has entered into a series of agreements with ICANN, under which it performs what are known as the IANA functions. These include assigning Internet protocol numbers to regional registries, who then assign them to Internet service providers. Another function is the maintenance and updating of the root zone file of top-level domain names, the so-called address book for the Internet that is necessary for the routing of Internet communications. It does so at no cost to the U.S. government, and our role in this process is simply to verify changes and updates proposed by ICANN to the root zone file before passing the changes on to VeriSign, which actually maintains and updates the file. ICANN, along with other Internet technical organizations such as the Internet Engineering Task Force, develop their policies through bottom-up multi-stakeholder processes. These efforts are open to all stakeholders, whether they're businesses, civil society organizations, technical experts, or governments, who work in concert to reach consensus agreement on Internet policies. The U.S. government has been a vigorous supporter of the multi-stakeholder model of Internet governance from the start. However, we're not the only ones. As the Congresswoman mentioned, in 2012, both houses of Congress unanimously passed resolutions stating that it is the consistent and unequivocal policy of the United States to promote a global Internet free from government control and preserve and advance the successful multi-stakeholder model that governs the Internet today. So in furtherance of this clear congressional statement, on March 14th, NTIA announced the final phase of the privatization of the domain name system by asking ICANN to convene global stakeholders to develop a proposal to transition the current role played by NTIA in the coordination of the DNS. And in making this announcement, we stated that the transition proposal must have broad community support and must address 4 principles. It must support and enhance the multi-stakeholder model. It must maintain the security, stability, and resiliency of the Internet domain name system. It must meet the needs and expectations of the global customers and partners of IANA services, and it must maintain the openness of the Internet. And we also made it crystal clear that we will not accept a proposal that replaces the NTIA role with a government-led or intergovernmental solution. We asked ICANN, as the current IANA functions contractor and global coordinator for the DNS, to convene the multi-stakeholder process to develop the transition plan. We informed ICANN that we expected it to work collaboratively with the other Internet technical organizations, including the Internet Society, the IETF, the Internet Architecture Board, and the regional Internet registries. 2 weeks ago at its meeting in Singapore, ICANN, along with these organizations, convened 2 public sessions to obtain stakeholder input on how to design the process to develop the transition plan, collecting several hours of public comment, which will help craft a proposal for the process going forward. And just yesterday, ICANN published a summary of the Singapore discussions and asked for public comment on a possible framework for developing the transition plan. Now, before I discuss some of the reaction to our announcement, let me go back to our core principles and talk about how what we did last month fits within the policy framework we apply to all Internet issues. To support growth, we need to focus on maintaining trust that the domain name system will work as intended. We do that by ensuring that ICANN operates with technical competence and in a manner that is accountable and transparent to the user community. We also need to encourage greater globalization to bring more users online, and our announcement to transition our role in the IANA functions directly supports the principles of growth and innovation. Our continued involvement with IANA could deter globalization, as developing countries fear that the Internet is controlled by the U.S. for the exclusive benefit of U.S. interests. Our current role in the IANA functions, although largely symbolic, is used by other countries to argue for greater governmental control of the DNS at the United Nations or the International Telecommunication Union, thus jeopardizing innovation on the internet by subjecting it to top-down government regulation. Now, as Ed mentioned, I expect that some of you noticed our announcement in the press, as it's attracted the attention of a few people. But we've been extremely pleased that our announcement has been met with broad support from those companies and organizations that depend on an open internet to do business. Companies like Google, Cisco, Verizon, and AT&T. And I greatly appreciate the vocal support from Ed and CCIA on this announcement. While some have raised concerns that the United States is giving up control of the internet, your organization, as well as these other companies, understand that transitioning our role is the best path forward to ensuring a free and open internet. Yet, myths and misperceptions about our announcement abound. For the last 3 weeks, I've been responding to these issues, trying to clear up the misunderstandings. But today, largely inspired by Ed's authoritative essay on our announcement, I'm going to let members of the global internet community answer the critics. A refrain we've seen repeated is that the Obama administration is giving away the internet. But your president, Ed Black, gave a clear response to this in an op-ed that ran in Huffington Post last week. He called our announcement, quote, a strategic move not just for the United States, but for all those around the world committed to internet freedom. It is exactly because such countries like Russia and China are seeking greater international governmental control over internet content that the recent NTIA proposal is to be lauded. Thank you, Ed. I could not have said it better myself. Eli Dorado, a research fellow from George Mason University's Mercatus Center, expressed another independent view on the subject. He said our announcement, quote, undercuts the primary jurisdiction used by authoritarian regimes to agitate for control of the internet. Others have raised concern that transitioning away from our role will hamper free speech online and lead to greater censorship. But a coalition of human rights groups disagrees. Human Rights Watch, Freedom House, Center for Democracy and Technology, and others combined to write Congress last week stating their belief that, quote, this move could help thwart government overreach in internet governance, which would have devastating implications for human rights worldwide. Others have argued that if it's not broke, why fix it? But Microsoft's David Tennenhouse has the response. He says this move marks the evolution of a domain name privatization effort that began in 1998. And he knows because he was part of the group that began the transition process. He notes that internet governance has been the responsibility of literally dozens of different organizations to create and implement the key standards, shape business practices, and develop norms that have enabled the internet to grow at an astonishing rate over the last 20 years. This model, he goes on to say, has served the world well and led to countless innovations that have transformed our world and initiating the final steps in the transition of the IANA functions now is a clear recognition of the value and success of this unique model. Another concern we hear is whether the global internet community is ready to fill this role of transitioning the United States role. Cisco's Robert Pepper answered that concern in a blog post, stating that, quote, NTIA has outlined a powerful process for the move towards full privatization and globalization of DNS management. It is based upon the recognition that the ecosystem of organizations, groups, and individuals which make up the multi-stakeholder internet governance community is mature and robust and can stand on its own. And AT&T's Len Calley adds, quote, NTIA has made this initiative at the right time. It has provided a blueprint for how the multi-stakeholder community can further internationalize the governance of the internet while critically preserving the security, stability, and dynamism that we all require. Still others have questioned whether the transition will upset the stability of the internet. But Vint Cerf, an early internet pioneer, currently the internet evangelist at Google, said just the opposite. Quote, the internet was built to be borderless, and this move toward a more multi-stakeholder model of governance creates an opportunity to preserve its security, stability, and openness. So these are the comments of the global internet community, and they reflect a firm understanding and embrace of the multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance. I know these issues are complicated and easily misunderstood by some who do not typically play in the internet governance arena. But that is why it is vitally important that the global community continue to provide a chorus of public support, outreach, and education on this important issue. In closing, I want to thank Ed, CCIA, and all of you members here today for your support. And I urge you to continue to speak out in support of multi-stakeholder internet governance wherever and whenever you can. Working together as a community, I am confident that we can ensure that the open internet is allowed to flourish and prosper, to drive innovation and economic growth for the U.S. and for the world. Thank you for your attention. And I guess we have some time for questions, Ed, is that right? Okay.
Let me open it up. Down at the end, I never get to people down there.
Paul Kirby with TR Daily. Larry, I guess I'm curious if you're surprised at the level of reaction to the announcement. You guys made it obviously late on a Friday. That's when announcements in Washington are often made to not get as much press, but you got a lot of press anyway. So I wanted to see if you were surprised at the reaction.
So we never intended to do it at the end of the day Friday. Part of the little known facts about what was going on was it was actually planned for the following week, but we got it had been leaked to the press, and a couple of press outlets had indicated they were going to run the story Friday night, and we felt at that point we needed to move up our announcement so that we could make it clear exactly what was happening, as opposed to having the press speculate based on some hearsay they may have heard from somebody else. So I know I've seen the comment, Paul, from others that, well, the government must have known this was going to be controversial or bad, and they waited till the end of the day Friday to do it. That was not our plan.
James Waterworth from the CCIA in Brussels. I'm very interested in, you mentioned the principles which will guide your evaluation of any new model of oversight. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you will evaluate, what process you will go through in terms of evaluating any possible new governance models, whether you'll go through that privately in your own office or whether you'll involve other stakeholders in such a discussion.
Well, first and foremost, we need all stakeholders involved in developing the plan. So what we're looking for is a consensus plan that's developed by all stakeholders. At that point, the question of what further review needs to be done, I think, not clear where that question even goes, if in fact we achieve the first goal, which is to get a consensus multi-stakeholder proposal delivered to us. The idea of handing it off to some smaller group of people to then evaluate that, I'm not quite sure how that fits as consistent with the overall idea of multi-stakeholder governance. Having said that, though, we've been very clear about the principles that need to be applied. We've been very clear that we expect the process to be open, transparent, and fully inclusive. And to date, certainly based on what we observed in Singapore with the public meetings that ICANN convened and reflected in the material that they just put out yesterday that summarizes the discussions in Singapore, and again, asks the entire community to provide input on how to design the process going forward. I think we're encouraged by what we see so far in terms of the process that's going to be developed by the community here.
I didn't see exactly when you sat down, but Congresswoman Eshoo, who spoke before you, talked about a concern that she has, and I think a concern that we share at CCIA, that the actions currently being taken by the Congress today or tomorrow to basically kind of limit you guys in what you're doing are going to have very negative repercussions abroad. And can you talk to that, or do you share that same concern?
Well, I think I would certainly, first thing I would say is that if you believe that, and I'm not suggesting you shouldn't, I think it's important to let your representatives know that as they consider these bills. And I think beyond that, we certainly have no problem having open discussions about this. I pledged last week to the House Energy and Commerce Committee that we would keep them fully informed. We think that's appropriate. They're stakeholders too, and they need to understand how this process is working out. And we hope that in doing so, we will build more and more support for what Congress has already put into words, that it supports the multi-stakeholder process. And I think this is an opportunity for Congress to to get behind that and demonstrate that in terms of how they support this process going forward.
Jonathan Band, counsel to CCIA. If I could just take us in a slightly different direction for a second, away from domain names and to copyright. To those of us outside of the government, it really seems that NTIA plays a critical role within the interagency process in making sure that the perspective of the internet and the perspective of the open internet is really reflected in debates about copyright policy, again, within the interagency process, and at the same time, it seems you're to some extent outmanned and outgunned. Virtually every other government agency has an IP enforcement office and has all these personnel whose job it is to look out for the entertainment industry. So first, I want to express our appreciation for the role that NTIA seems to be playing within this interagency process. And then the question is what more can we do to help NTIA help us?
Well, thank you for that. And I do think there are some things I would urge you to do. First off, I think your observation is an important one, and it reflects back to my comments at the beginning where I said that NTIA, and I think in terms overall the Department of Commerce at the top level, views the internet as our client. So we know that there are other agencies, including some bureaus within within Commerce, that have more specific mandates. So our Patent and Trademark Office is very concerned about piracy of intellectual property on the internet, and they're right to be concerned about it, and we need people focused on that. At the same time, as proposals are presented for how to deal with that, we feel that all of the stakeholders need to be considered. We think that these primary issues of growth and innovation have to, in effect, provide a frame within which to have those discussions. We think that's what we provide at NTIA, because we don't have individual constituency groups that are pushing for any particular outcome on the internet. So we think we can perform some of that role of being the trusted agent looking at these various proposals. That's the role we play now. It's a role we want to play. To your point about are we resourced enough, I will say the President in his 2015 budget proposed that NTIA be given additional resources to build up our staff in terms of internet policy so that we can play a more effective role in that area. And again, we'd certainly welcome your support for those sorts of proposals.
Let me maybe ask what might seem to be a bureaucratic question, but it's really part of my context of the politics of this. The policy with regard to internet governance has really been pretty consistent since well into the Clinton era, at least, and maybe before. To what extent, given the controversy that seems to have arisen more emotionally than out of fact base, whether or not there has been an effort by other agencies, the White House, to maybe bring in some officials from the Bush administration, et cetera, to be loud voices to support this going forward. And I would, if that hasn't, I guess maybe it's happening or trying to happen, but I would urge that would be really important to make sure we don't slide into a partisan misunderstanding here and attempt to capitalize on it. There's some strong Republican voices who can be paired with some of the historic Democratic leaders on the issue. I'm a Magaziner getting up with somebody from Bush administration to say, folks, calm down. You're panicking here. This is not. Don't try to make political hay out of this.
No, I think it's an excellent point, and we're working on that. I know Fadi, from ICANN's perspective, is also working on that. So yes, excellent point.
Yes, Alex.
I was going to ask Alex Byers with Politico. I was going to ask this a second ago, and you sort of took the words out of my mouth, but I guess I'll just ask it a little more specifically. I was going to ask about the budget request for, I think, $8 million for not the Internet Policy Task Force, because that already exists. I think an Internet Policy Center, it's called. And obviously, as Jonathan pointed out, there already is this sort of NTIA role as coordinating, and we see that with sort of the PTO, DMCA talks that are going on right now. But is an Internet Policy Center just sort of a fun name that sounds good for politics, or what will be different if that money is appropriated, and when we launch an Internet Policy Center, how will that change things?
So hopefully what we would see is more front-end coordination on issues, as opposed to having them develop through the silos and then kind of collide with each other, which sometimes happens, as people know who have lived through other of these internet policy debates. So we think it's important, again, to represent the internet. We think it's important to try to balance the competing interests and do that as early in the policy-making process as we can, which I think does require more coordination, not just within the Department of Commerce, which, as you pointed out, we already do through the Internet Policy Task Force, but I think taking that concept and applying it more broadly within the administration.
And although I don't want to, the prime topic you talked on is very important, but it would be silly of me to have you, with your experience and the breadth of responsibility for NTA, not to ask you to go into some of the other subjects that you have responsibility for, telecom, privacies, and telecom issues related to competition, et cetera. There's a lot of other things going on right now in those space, and if you would, just maybe touch on a few of them.
Yeah, I'd be happy to kind of tick it off, although I'll tell you, I've been kind of a one-track mind for the last 3 weeks, and will be until I get through this judiciary hearing tomorrow. Yes, I mean, we have 4 major areas of endeavor at NTIA. What we're talking about in terms of ICANN is a piece of our larger internet governance policy work, both domestic and internationally. So within that includes our work on privacy, where in response or as an outgrowth of the President's blueprint on privacy released in 2012, we've been working with, again, a multi-stakeholder community to develop codes of conduct to implement the very broad provisions of the Consumer Bill of Rights. And so some of your companies have participated in those discussions. So last year we concluded a draft of the Code of Conduct for mobile application transparency, and the group, again, anybody can participate, so it's slightly different group than we had last year, is now focused on looking at the commercial use of facial recognition technology. So that's a large effort that we're underway in, and we have been providing, along with Secretary Pritzker, a supporting a role in the White House's and John Podesta's big data initiative, of which you will hear more, I'm sure, in the coming weeks. Secondly, we manage all the spectrum used by federal agencies, and so that puts us right squarely in the middle of the whole debate on how do we find more spectrum for commercial use. And so several years ago, I guess 2010, the President charged us to work with the FCC to find 500 megahertz of additional spectrum to be made available for mobile broadband. I think the scorecard is that I think we're up over 400 megahertz so far in terms of identification. FCC will be auctioning some of that off later this year in the 1695 and 1755 bands, but we continue to work with the FCC and with agencies, and more importantly, we work with the industry itself to continue to find opportunities for reallocation. The big advance in the last couple of years in that space has been the recognition that we have to move to an environment of spectrum sharing. The President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology made this finding in their report that came out about a year and a half ago, and we had come to our own conclusion in that regard, which really changes the whole way that industry and government agencies have to work together now in terms of how we find the ways to coexist in the same spectrum, same geographic location, same time frame, and allow systems to work in connection with each other without interfering with each other. It's a major, major effort, and one that we're really looking forward to industry to take on and help solve a lot of these problems. To that end, last year we created the Center for Advanced Communications out in Boulder, which is a virtual joint venture between us and NIST, to provide measurement and testing capabilities to both agencies and to industry in terms of solving some of these spectrum sharing problems. Third area for us has been broadband. I think folks remember that NTIA set up from scratch a $4 billion grant program to expand broadband access and adoption across the country. Those projects are in the wind down stages, closeout stages now, but already we've added over 100,000, or our grantees have added over 100,000 miles of upgraded broadband facilities across the country. We've added hundreds of thousands of new subscribers through the adoption efforts that our grantees have undertaken. And our goal now, and as reflected in our budget request for 2015, is to now refocus what is, we believe, the most expert and knowledgeable group of employees anywhere in the federal government on broadband, to refocus how we continue to expand broadband access and adoption, using our skills and knowledge and expertise in the absence of federal grant dollars, which means working with other sources of funding and working with communities to help them position themselves for this greater investment. And then last, in 2012, Congress also gave us the task of helping to organize FirstNet, which will be the public safety nationwide broadband network. So, that is operated through an independent board and through a separate staff, although under the legislation, it's an independent organization within NTIA, and we still struggle with figuring out exactly what that means. But the board has been operating now for a year and a half. They've been staffing up, and they're well on their way to completing a business plan to allow them to move forward and get that network designed and built.
I'd actually love to listen more, but I understand that my next step has changed in a tight schedule, so.
Okay.
We'll move on.
All right. Well, thank you.